Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Oh, woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Oh, woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Then, too, there was the music. It would be hard to overstate the significance of the music of the movement. Ask any historian or person who lived through it, and they'll tell you that music was fundamentally at the heart of the civil rights movement, and a huge part of why it was able to be so successful, and why it gained as much national attention and participation as it did. The specific term that comes up over and over again when looking into this topic is the phrase freedom songs. But what are freedom songs? Where did they come from? And why did they have such a huge impact on the civil rights movement? Well, let's dive into it. Freedom songs were not limited to one specific genre, but for the most part they were based on the melodies or texts of black hymns or spirituals and other folk and roots music. They were generally based on a melody that most people were already familiar with. Crucially, they weren't songs created by the civil rights movement. Rather, they were about the everyday experiences of the people within the movement, used strategically to help empower that movement to become even stronger. Freedom songs often functioned as congregational songs, which are songs that are started and led by a song leader, but these song leaders were not soloists. They were instead catalysts to get the people around them to come together and sing as a group and community.
You gotta move when the spirit says move. You gotta move when the spirit says move. Now when the spirit says move, you gotta move, oh Lord. You gotta move when the spirit says move. Work! You got to work when the spirit says work. Go ahead. You got to work when the spirit says work. Yeah, let me hear you now. Well, work, oh Lord. You got to work if the spirit says you gotta preach. You gotta preach.
Before we get into how exactly they were used during the civil rights movement and why they were so impactful, let's first talk a bit about the history and where they came from. Black activists from the civil rights movement were, of course, familiar with most of the spirituals that were used in these freedom songs, as they would have to be for the freedom songs to be successful. But a key transformation of these spirituals into freedom songs was the addition of leftist activists who were part of the labor union movement, working with those civil rights activists. Already in the 1930s and throughout the labor movement, socialist, communist, and other leftist activists had already begun working on racially integrating labor unions. The Highlander Center was the key place for education and activism in regards to the U.S. labor movement, and singing and song leading had always been a key feature of this education. Likewise, in the 1950s and early 1960s, when the Highlander Center turned its attention to racial integration and the civil rights movement, communal singing remained a central element of its work. After Highlander's previous music director unexpectedly passed away, Guy Carawan was hired to take his place. As Carawan worked with African American activists who visited Highlander, he realized that he could help them develop culturally authentic songs for the movement to use in the face of oppression. In 1960, Caraway organized a series of Highlander workshops designed to serve song leaders and choir directors who identified with the movement for freedom in the South. During the 1930s and 40s, there's no doubt that the progressive wing and the left wing of the labor movement was one of the most powerful forces for racial justice in the United States. So it seems only natural that leaders from that movement would work with leaders from the civil rights movement.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. The Union is behind us. We shall not be moved. The Union is behind us. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved.
Just as the use of songs helped the Union members have resilience and strength to confront their opponents and those who sought to devalue their labor and their lives, the use of freedom songs also gave courage to civil rights activists who faced danger at every turn. Fast forward to the 1950s and 60s, and songs were being used everywhere in the civil rights movement. They were at meetings, they were on the picket lines during marches, at sit-ins, and even in jails. But why did the civil rights movement happen precisely when it did? And how did it come to be so powerful and influential in America? Well, one of the precursors was very much the labor movement and the integration and overlap between labor movement activists and racial integrationist activists. Labor unions were, in many cases, a kind of training ground for the future leaders of the civil rights movement. They were able to learn critical organizing skills and social movement tactics and strategies. Another factor was the impact of World War II. Initially, African Americans were forced to fight in the war in segregated units. However, after pressure from grassroots forces led by black Union leader Philip A. Randolph, the government was forced to desegregate the military and the defense industries and institute fairer labor practices for both black men and women. After the integration of military units on the war front, when black soldiers returned home, they demanded respect for what they had done for their country, yet they were met with the exact same racism and hostility as before they had left. This created an entire sect of people who were particularly dissatisfied with how things were, because they had experienced how things could be. Which is why many of the key civil rights organizers from the 40s and 50s, who ended up building the structures needed for the larger civil rights movement to take place, were black veterans. A third factor was the optics stemming from the Cold War. America claimed to be fighting for a free world, yet its own African American citizens had a very obvious lack of freedoms. This international embarrassment made it easier for civil rights legislation to be slowly passed. A fourth factor was the rise of anti-colonial struggles in Africa, which proved to be an inspiration for black activists in America. These struggles for independence in African countries inspired many student-led sit-ins. Black novelist James Baldwin draws the connection by saying, "All of Africa will be free before we can get a lousy cup of coffee." The fifth and final key factor was the development of new political ideas, ideologies, strategies, and tactics. This included the knowledge of labor union organizers, as previously mentioned, and former members of the key progressive organization of the 1930s and labor movement, which was the Communist Party. Civil rights activists took these strategies from labor unions and the Communist Party and combined them with the traditional forms of black activism and black Christianity, which is a big part of why so many of the freedom songs are based on spirituals.
This little light tonight, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go.
Dating as far back as the start of the institution of slavery in America, the most important institution for organizing within the black community has been the black church. While slavery was still a common practice and legalized in most of America, preachers would interpret messages of deliverance that are used in the Bible not as heavenly ideals and promises for after you die, but as earthly goals to make happen while you're still alive. Likewise, black choral singers and ministers would develop sermons that contained messages about worldly routes to freedom, rather than just waiting for freedom in heaven. This merged seamlessly into the civil rights struggle and the use of freedom songs. So how specifically was music used? Well, for one, music was a form of history. Freedom songs were not created spontaneously. They were carefully reworked in order to make the transition to the radically new ideas specific to the civil rights movement easier to digest and get on board with, especially for the older or more conservative members of the church. Because music emotionally and intellectually attached these new ideas of integration to the feelings and ideas of the old spirituals and gospel songs, music was able to connect these two different things and give a sense of history to the movement.
Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain, to let my people go.
When people felt dejected or when the stakes of a situation felt not worth it, the songs could both remind people of how their ancestors had faced much worse circumstances and also could revitalize their anger over the fact that after hundreds of years, they still weren't truly free.
Mine eyes have seen injustice in each city, town, and state. Your jails are filled with black men, and your courts are white with hate. And with every bid for freedom, someone whispers to us, wait, but the movement's moving on.
This deep sense of history was able to be carried out best by song compared to any other medium. During the Montgomery boycott and the sit-in revolution, songs were critical for making people feel connected to one another and simply giving them something to do to pass the time. They also helped in the long term with community organizing, as every mass meeting always started with freedom songs, involved freedom songs during the majority of it, and ended with freedom songs. Many people would come to the meetings just to hear the singing, but because of how powerful of an organizing tool singing together is and how deeply ingrained music is in people, this would often lead to them taking on a bigger level of commitment than they had initially planned.
Come, all you freedom fighters, a story I will tell. Locked down in prison in a lonesome jail cell. You better tell me now, which side are you on? Which side are you on? I want to hear you now. You really better tell me, which side are you on?
These songs also served a very practical purpose during protests. Initially, during the very first protests within the movement, most demonstrations were silent because protesters were rightfully scared that any sign of rowdiness or disruptiveness from a group of black people who were gathered together would then be used as an excuse to assault them. However, the use of singing could both convey that this was an organized event rather than a mob, as well as making them appear a lot less threatening. To wrap up this video, I want to zoom in and take a look at Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit. Originally a poem written and set to music by a Jewish schoolteacher, the song was first performed at left-wing gatherings, and then later performed and made famous by Billie Holiday. She eventually made it a requirement to sing it at every venue that she performed at. Once it was recorded in 1939, the song became a hit and then was further popularized by other artists covering it during the Civil Rights Movement. Though not a freedom song in the traditional sense, it was able to reach people who were otherwise uninvolved in the movement and remains a popular rallying cry to this day. This song is not a freedom song in the same way that nearly every other song up to this point has been. In terms of genre, it's more easily categorized as popular music rather than folk or gospel music, and it was also typically sung by a single person on stage rather than a group of people at a protest or a march or a sit-in. Nevertheless, it's a great example of all of the things we've been talking about up until this point. It was made possible by the collaboration between the labor movement and the civil rights movement. The lyrics evolved over time to better suit the purposes that they were needed for, and Billie Holiday used the song to spread awareness of the injustices that black people in America were facing and provide courage and solidarity with the people protesting on the streets. It has since been covered by more than 60 artists, and shows us that hopefully music will continue to be used in the social justice fights of today and beyond.
Wait. I know this is a show, but you have to actually sing this song. You can never tell when you might need it. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let no injunction turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no injunction turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, yeah, keep on talking, yeah, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, yeah, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Yeah! Yeah!
All right.
Yeah!
All right.